everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, then I'm Riya Gandhi and I break down complex concepts related to English literature into simplified bits and pieces, especially the ones that UGC NET loves to ask. In the last video, we had started unpacking Jacques Derrida's concept of deconstruction, and a lot of you found it extremely helpful, but I also know that we left some of the most crucial parts of deconstruction untouched. So in today's video, which is part 2 of Jacques Derrida's concept of deconstruction, we are going to dive deeper into the concept and try and understand it from different perspectives in a way that's still crystal clear. In this video, we are going to simplify the key ideas, break down major quotes, and even deconstruct a real-world example by the end of this video. So stay tuned till the end and don't forget to make notes. Now, before we move on with the rest of the video, let's do a quick refresher of whatever we discussed in the first part. In the first part, we covered what deconstruction is not. It's not destruction, it's not a literary method or literary approach or even a part of an analysis. It's a way of reading things differently. Secondly, Derrida also challenged the idea that texts should have one single, stable or a fixed meaning, right? He talked about the arbitrariness of language. Also, he said that all meaning is built on binary oppositions. So basically drawing from the foundational ideas of structuralism, wherein they talked about binaries and how meaning is dependent between these binaries, like speech versus writing, light versus dark, male versus female. While talking about these binary oppositions, Derrida also sort of pointed out one of the most important things that we missed in the first part. He said that in these binary oppositions, for example, speech versus writing, light versus dark, male versus female, there will always be this one term which will be perceived as more privileged than the other. Right? So for example, you have male and the superiority of male in comparison to female, the superiority of light in comparison to dark. But according to Derrida, this is also an illusion. This sort of privileged term in the binary oppositions is also an illusion. Why? Because this so-called privileged term actually depends on what it excludes. Right? So for example, if I ask you right now that how are you going to define light? Light is something that is not dark. How are you going to define the word speech? Speech is something that is not written, right? So this is how he went about in determining the instability of the binaries. Right? Now, having cleared all of these things, now we can move on with the rest of the video. Now, while talking about these binary oppositions, we also touched upon the concept of absent presence that Derrida talked about. At first, it might have seemed a bit complicated to understand, but it isn't actually. So essentially, in order to understand this concept of absent presence, let's take a very basic example, right? For example, there is this character in a movie or in a novel who is called as very pure, who is identified as very pure. Now, that word seems to be stable. It seems to have a center to it, right? Some stability to it. But how would you define pure without impure, right? So if I ask you to define the word pure, how are you going to describe it? You're going to say that it is something that it does not have any kind of impurities to it, any kind of bad things or negative things attached with it, right? So, essentially speaking, without impurity, you're not going to define purity. Purity without impurity doesn't mean anything, right? So, the word relies on what is not there. That's what Derrida has called as absent presence. We are depending on ideas that are missing in order to construct what's present. Right? So this was basically the idea of absent presence. Now let's build on that and go back to what deconstruction really is, right? So as we have discussed, deconstruction is a way of reading. It is a form of philosophical inquiry wherein you try to question the traditional assumptions, right, about truth, about identity, right, especially in a novel, let's say, right, wherein you try to deconstruct the given narratives to you. So how do you do that? You don't readily accept what is present in front of you. You try to break down the text into understanding that are there any gaps in the text? As in, is there something that the narrator is not telling us? So reading between the lines, reading against the grain, these were some of the concepts that we discussed in the previous video. Something that you do have to remember is that deconstruction teaches us to distrust easy meanings, wherein things might seem obvious to you, right, in a movie or in a novel, but sometimes you have to go beneath the surface level meaning. For example, when you're talking about villain versus the hero, you have to try and understand the psychology of the villain. You need to understand why the villain did what he did. You need to ask yourself that what if the meaning of this text is actually hiding in its contradictions, in its gaps, in its silences, right? So some things that you have to remember are that meaning is not fixed, especially when you look at Derrida's concept of deconstruction. Meaning is not stable. It is constantly deferred, wherein there is no ultimate single meaning, hidden meaning waiting to be discovered from a particular text. Also understand that according to Derrida's concept of deconstruction, words refer to other words. The association of the word with the meaning is arbitrary. What do I mean by arbitrary? Again, when I say the word dog, how are you going to define it? A four-legged animal? So how did you come to associate the word dog with its meaning? It was practiced by us for a very long period of time, right? And that's how we came to associate the word with the meaning. That means that it is all human generated. It's not a fixed rule that this particular word is going to refer to this particular meaning. And that is why he said one of the most famous, one of the most quoted, controversial and most confusing lines in his life, which are, "There is nothing outside the text." And when he said this, he did not mean that there is no world outside of your books. No. What he meant was that if language itself is unstable, how are you going to interpret the world around you? What he meant to say was that everything that we understand about the world around us, about the society around us, right, be it history, emotions, identity, everything is filtered through language. But we just proved that language itself is unstable. Words are referring to other words, right? There is no one single true meaning, because meanings are constantly deferred, right? Then in that case, our meanings are never fully grounded. What we make sense of the world around us, how we define our emotions, our feelings, all of those things are pretty subjective. So in a way, if you try to understand it deeply, maybe Derrida was trying to tell us that language sort of also limits our reality. Maybe there is something more to this, right? More to this material world in which we are living in. But we don't have the required language to make sense of it. And as a result of which, this language is also sort of limiting our reality. Now that we have broken down some of the most complex ideas related to Derrida's concept of deconstruction, let's deconstruct one of the most popular movies that you must have at least watched or heard of it. And that is Beauty and the Beast. On the surface, the story is quite simple, okay? It's a tale of love conquering appearances where beauty falls in love with the beast, wherein the moral is basically that inner goodness triumphs over everything else. But now, let's deconstruct it. Why is the beast rewarded only after he becomes more human? Right? Why does beauty have to be beautiful and passive? Why do these characters have to be on the extreme ends of the spectrum? Like, why are they so exaggerated? Don't you think? So when you're deconstructing a movie like this or a text like this for that matter, you have to read between the lines. You have to understand the gaps, and you also have to read against the grain. So by reading closely, you see that the film is full of contradictions between its surface message and its deeper assumption. And so once you deconstruct a text or a movie, you look out for these contradictions. The text is trying to say something else, but it's achieving a completely different purpose. Right? That's deconstruction. It's not just about what's being said or what's being showcased or what's being reflected. It's about what's being left unsaid, what's being implied, what's being silenced, and how those silences, they speak volumes. Right? So this was about Derrida's concept of deconstruction. Let's do a quick recap of these two parts. In the first part, we talked about who is Jacques Derrida. We talked about the concept of absent presence. We talked about binary oppositions. We introduced the concept of deconstruction, right? We talked about how meaning is unstable and it's not actually very fixed, it's shifting. In today's video, which is part 2 of Derrida's concept of deconstruction, we discussed about this concept in more detail. We applied this concept to a movie. At the same time, we also simplified some of the most complex concepts. Right? So what does this mean for your UGC NET English prep? Don't just memorize what Derrida said. Right? Try to understand it. Try to break it down in your way, whatever makes it simpler for you to understand. So with this, we end our video on Derrida's concept of deconstruction. If you still find any difficulty in understanding, or you are still confused about certain parts and certain terms, feel free to mention it in the comment section below and I'll be very happy to help you. If you found this video on Derrida's concept of deconstruction informative and helpful, please like, share and subscribe to my channel for more such insights on English literature and tips and strategies for UGC NET English exam. Thank you so much for watching till the end, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.